Not whole. When you get into a relationship, you can fragment into a million pieces. This happened to me in my 20s. I thought I was whole. I had read all about archetypal psychiatry, Carl Jung, individuation, the shadow, alchemy, but I was not whole. I had not done the work. I married a man, he looked like a god. He was beautiful and nice and sweet. And for 3 years he was that way. We got married, but I gave him my all. And then he resumed his drinking career. I had no idea that he was an alcoholic before I met him, because he stopped drinking when he fell in love. Sometimes if you fall in love, you will stop your habits to please the other person. I didn't drink, and so he didn't drink. Well, after 3 years, he fell back into his bag. He resumed his drinking career. He relapsed into his old habit. I found out later that he had drank all his life. And he became a totally different person. Allergy, alcohol is such a disease that it changes the person entirely. Their old self is gone completely. It's a conduit to the devil. He became so mean and looked entirely different. He looked 30 years older. A mean old ogre, cruel and very vindictive and aggressive towards me, involved other people, gossiped about me, tore me down, and I fragmented into a million pieces. I thought I was whole. I was not whole. I had not done the work. I was still unconscious. You know, I had an ego. Oh, I had a Ph.D. in psychology, big ego about that. It was a penthouse. I drove a Jaguar. You know, I thought, well, big deal. I had an ego problem, a bit arrogant, but I was not whole. I hadn't done the work. And I slid into a very lower level for about 20 years. It took to get back. That's how serious this fragmentation is if you aren't whole, if you aren't an individual, if you are fused with other people. When they turn against you, watch out. It's so important to be whole in yourself and to, just with God, an individual, have done the work, become yourself. That's a long story short. So I'm very aware of this. And this is why this work is so important. Because if this split into fragmentation happens later in life, what happens is it brings down your body, the somatype, the body. Illnesses are everywhere. You know, you see people in their 50s and 60s that look 80 because life has taken its toll. They fragmented and the body followed. Cancer, heart disease, stroke, body, mind, the overwhelming stress of a bad relationship or rejection or loss takes its toll in the body. We are encumbered by the past. But God says, see, I am doing a new work. I am making a way in the wilderness, putting rivers in the desert, saving you from disaster. Yes, but we can bring down ourselves by preoccupation with the past. We have to recognize it's over, or it creates a groove in the brain that we keep repeating. The brain wants to recreate the past in order to correct it. We'll find ourselves getting in the same old type of relationships in order to correct the past ones, even the ones in childhood. That's why it's so important to complete the past, finish it. It was another person. It wasn't you. You're a totally new person now, and actively mitigate against recreating it. Because God says, see, I am making a new way. The past is gone entirely. This is such an important instruction of the Lord. Paul, the greatest apostle, said it was his greatest accomplishment was to forget the past. and to press on to what lies ahead, no matter what your age. The past is a bitch. The past will ruin you. We don't want to recreate it in order to correct it. It's corrected. God corrected it. Jesus' atonement on the cross ended it. We paid for it. He paid for it. So this is why it's so important. It is the biggest commandment to forget the past so that you can have this wonderful future. And it will be wonderful compared to the old life, which was miserable. It says in the Bible, I blot out your transgressions for my own sake. God doesn't want to remember them anymore. God has put them in the bottom of the ocean. He doesn't want to see his son and daughter in that light. That was when Satan was in control. He had the default setting. No more of the past. That was a weaselly, immature creature. A person who was a victim of everybody around, thinking that they were helping them. You know, toxic people see loners like me as great targets because we don't have people around to protect us. If they see a loner, oh, they doesn't have a family around, he doesn't have people checking in on him, that's my target. You see, we have to stand up for ourselves and lay the boundary anyway. If you don't have boundaries, you will attract maggots like a magnet because you have nobody to protect you. You've got to protect yourself. You know, remembering the past is a prison. That's actually what it is. The brain recreates it. Remember it? It's a groove, and the brain recreates it. It's a biocomputer. It recreates it in an attempt to correct it, but it never can be corrected if you're attracting the same types of people, which it will do. It's a fabulous computer. It wants to make things right. So it attracts the same Tom, Dick, and Harry to create the same situation, which was scary. You see? But God doesn't want to remember it anymore. We only have a flash of life. Life is over in a minute. Before you know it, you're old. And so God doesn't want to waste time like this. He wants to go on to the future. Unconsciously, the empath recreates the familiar. Yeah. Even though it was incredibly painful, they recreate the familiar. It seems so ineffective, doesn't it? To do the same thing over and over again. But that is what the biocomputer wants to do, is to correct the past. Boy, that's why it's so important to know Jesus corrected the past. He cut it loose. He brought justice. You know, God says, if the wicked try to lure the innocent in, you know, like a child or somebody who's innocent, they will pay the price. God will get them. You see, he has already taken vengeance. Part of the reason the biocomputer wants to correct the past is to get vengeance, get justice. This is why God says, vengeance is mine. I'll take care of it. Don't you do it. Because you're just going to recreate the same drama, the same anxiety. It's so aging. It's so taxing. Stress is the biggest reason for disease. You see, we can't take vengeance on our own. And that includes grudges and everything. Forgiveness is totally self-interested. I forgive you in order to not be bothered with thinking about you anymore. You know, the extreme sensitivity of the empath was forged in emotional chaos. That's why they're able to feel everything. That's how they were born, into chaos. So they know it all. Most people are divorced from their body, divorced from their perceptions. They don't know anything. Nothing. But somebody who is adapted to that mess knows everything. Okay? That's how they were forged. So that's part of the reason they put up with the same things. And a toxic person can see, oh, she put up with that. Well, let me dig further. Let me try more. Oh, she put up with that. Because we were so used to putting up with things. That's what built our biocomputer, is we had to put up with things while seeing it all. And if you put up with things while seeing it all, boy, are you going to have to pay the piper later in life. Because your brain will think, why would you put up with that? You remember it, and you think, how dumb. So you start telling them off, telling the error off. You're a different person now, you're mature. You weren't mature then. You were allowing it then. So you keep returning to the same argument over and over again. That's what I would do all the time. Lecture to the wind. Because I was mature now, and I could not understand why I tolerated it then. So the brain kept going back to argue, tell them off, even though they're dead or gone. You know, they're in prison or in a rest home or whatever. They don't care. But the brain wants to finish it, but it can never be finished because it wasn't finished. So all you can do is go on now. Yes, they developed the ability to see everything. It was the only way to stay safe, to be acutely aware of everything, of what a pause meant, of what between the lines meant, of what a raised eyebrow meant. We see everything, and yet we're an empath. Oh, well, maybe you had a bad childhood. Well, I understand what it's like to be scapegoated like he probably was. You know, we have deep understanding for other people, so we cut them slack, whereas most people would say, get out of here. I don't have time for this. You know, I'm going to call the sheriff, whatever. But an empath has experienced the scapegoat syndrome. They've experienced being unloved and shoved aside. So they put up with people more than others, but the inner man says, hey, I know what you're doing. I know you're trying to mooch off of me right now, but doesn't say anything because of their kinder nature. It's a sad thing. Get over it. Grow up. Be selective about people now. Don't sacrifice yourself for anybody. It's always good to hear from my Ph.D. dissertation because I was recovering then. The need to anticipate the storm before it erupted, to read micro-expressions like sacred text, to sense shifts in tone as if survival depended on it, which it did. Especially as a baby in the crib, you learn to detect micro-expressions, microaggressions. That was the little biocomputer learning to survive, okay? And you're still that way. But you can be a world-famous scholar if you appreciate these talents in you, which were developed for survival, rather than be a continuous victim. Get out of that. Again, from my dissertation. Attunement was a protection. Hyper-vigilance was my only intuition. Peace was a luxury. This was the origin of the empath, extraordinary capacity. When I wrote my Ph.D. thesis, it was like this thick. And they said it was the greatest thing that was ever written at University of California because it was from intuition of every single nuance I described. And I gave labels for it. Every type of interaction that other people never thought of. You know, they weren't fighting for their life. You see? So everything has to be turned around. No matter what kind of a victim you've been in life, it's going to make you the greatest. It's going to be enantiodromia. Everything becoming its opposite. The gangster becomes a priest. You know? The sinner becomes a saint. everything becomes its opposite. In a sense, success is owed to the unpredictability of the people they depended on. Like I said before, betrayal brings that shift in the empath's brain into maturity. Yeah, the people you depended on for emotional and physical survival, maybe, were so darn unpredictable that it made you hyper-vigilant. Hyper-vigilance, which the world calls paranoia. It may even get you medicated. Watch out for that. You're just too darn smart. You see between the lines. The medical professionals could call that paranoia, okay? But it was for your own survival. So thank the people you were dependent on for their unpredictability. Everything can become its opposite. It's God's will. Thank Him for it. Of the good old thesis. The empath had to earn approval through self-erasure, but upon awakening, it refuses to carry the same emotional burdens it accepted in silence. You see how you have to change? You can't be a good old boy your whole life. You can't just be a wonderful hostess your whole life to people who are using you, because they will target you. You know, I used to say in the desert, I could sense people were using me and they knew I was alone. And that draws in toxic people, okay? And I used to say, well, my family's coming this weekend. My sister's here. You know, I would make up stories about my family being in town in order to protect myself, because I knew that they were targeting me because I had nobody to protect me. This is one reason to have people around as protection, but then they become the thing you need protection from. But it's just a footnote there. I remember doing that all through as a way of getting rid of people. I would say, look, my family's coming today, and they're even going to buy a house in town. So they'll be here all the time, you know, just to get rid of people. It's a very costly survival strategy to erase yourself. That's what I did. I even took on a different name. I even took on a different culture, everything. I had erased myself completely. And then when I got well, I took back my heritage, started investigating my heritage and becoming whole again, grounded in reality. It was so serious. Self-erasure. We don't want that. We want the power of selfhood. Good old dissertation again. The relationship to the narcissist is a return to the original emotional conflict within the family. That loyalty without boundaries is enslavement, and that compassion without self-regard is self-abandonment. Watch your loving personality. I hear people say, well, I love everybody. You know, I make cookies for anybody who wants to come over. I don't put down anybody. Anybody can get in my door. That's self-enslavement. You see, that's somehow you were taught that. Ever since World War II, it's been a social generation that we were not supposed to judge anybody. We were not supposed to have any lines. Just come one, come all. And if somebody's bad, we think, well, they had a bad childhood. Cut them some slack. I say, let's go back to original paths. Judge. We should judge. We should discern. We should draw lines to save the self, because you're going to be dead if you let some of these people in. Giving in to others is not spiritual maturity. It is emotional maladaptation, and you'll pay the piper later. When you're mature, when you're a little older, you're going to look back to all the ways you gave in. Women are going to look about how they gave in sexually. They didn't know any better. It was a sexualized generation. You know, the sexual liberation, and it ruined women. They gave in. They let men in their home, too. In the old days, the landlady would never let a woman entertain gentlemen in her home alone. I say let's go back, okay? Because men are bigger than women. You have to say, hey, you're bigger than I am. You can take over. I'm not going to let you in, though. I don't even know you. No, I'm not going to go off in the car with you. I don't even know you. We have to return to the old ways and not be so loose. Don't be loose. Be tight and investigate and draw boundaries. Those boundaries are the most important thing for psychological maturity. In closing, what you felt as noble is actually exhausting and self-betraying. You don't want to betray others, right? Betrayal's wrong. What about betraying yourself? Okay? It's not nobility. Nobility is a boundary. It's called aristocratic reserve. Don't give your all to people. Don't be loose. Don't just join right in. Have aristocratic reserve. That is the superior man or woman. He doesn't let everybody in. He's very careful because he has had his face pushed in the mud. But now that click in the head happened. It happened with betrayal. One betrayal is all it takes. And now he's discerning and selective.